Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to start with Parashat Balak. It's chapter 22, verse 2. And Balak, the son of Tzipor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. V'yar Balak ben Tzipor. This Balak ben Tzipor saw et kol asher also Yisrael le'emori, all that Israel did to the Amorites. Now, we're going to have two major concerns. Number one is the first question he brings up. We just had in the last week's Parsha the whole fight with Israel and Sichon and Og, which are Amorites. Very nice. This was really what frightened Balak, right? This is what frightened him. What about what happened 40 years or 39 years earlier, leaving Egypt? That was huge. You know, Egypt was decimated. Shouldn't that have brought on this fear? But no, it seems like, at least from the surface, it's what he just saw, what Israel did to the Amorites. Trust me, that's not at all what it means. And the next question he's going to ask is the fact that Israel, in these three verses, these 2 or 3 verses, Israel is called by 4 different names, which is very unusual. So put on your seatbelts. Let's go one word at a time. V'lo, Nisei Mitzrayim hayu gedolim me'elu. Is it not that the miracles that happened in Egypt were much greater than these? V'lama lo hitbonein ba'otim gedolos v'noros asher aseh Hashem. Why was he not contemplating and dwelling on those great things, those awesome things that Hashem had done back in Egypt? V'yesh od hitbonein, and something else to think about. Ki zachar kan, you know what's mentioned here? Es Yisrael ba'arba shemos. That the name of Israel, the people of Israel, are called by 4 different adjectives, 4 different names, pronouns. First of all, it says Yisrael, that's 1. Ha'am, that's 2. B'nei Yisrael, that's 3. And Kahal, that's 4. I'll read the verses and then we'll go back into the Kli Yakar. Moab was very frightened of the people. So we already said Israel. Balak saw all Israel had done. Moab was frightened because of the people. That's 2. Right? Because it was formidable, meaning great, and Moab was disgusted. In the face of the children of Israel, that's the 3rd time we're mentioned as the children of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, now the congregation, that's the 4th time we're mentioned, will chew up our entire surroundings, and as an ox chews up the greenery of the field. So that's really bothering the Kli Yakar, and he wants to explain it. And he goes on, he says, in the beginning, it said, as we said, you know, he was frightened because of all that Israel did to the Amorites, Israel. And then afterwards it says, V'yigar Moab m'bnei ha'am, that Moab was frightened because of the people. And then afterwards it says, V'yikatz Moab m'bnei bnei Yisrael, that Moab was disgusted because of bnei Israel. And then afterwards it says, now they're going to lick us up. This congregation is going to lick us up. So the 4th pronoun is the congregation. So he explains it like this. Ubira davar kafu. The explanation is like this. Shemiderech ha'olam. The way that the world works. This is, if you didn't know, that the malachim yeshlem sefer divrei hayamim, that the kings are privy to history because they have inherited diaries, they have a library, then they have people who can read. Anyway, they have books called chronicles in their personal library. Asher Allah ketuvim kol hakoros miyamim rabim, which has written on them all that has happened in the past. But the masses, the general masses, the uneducated people, Einam yuduim ki'im ha'hoveh. The only thing that they know is where their bread's coming from today. They only exist in the presence. They don't have a concept of history. Ma sheroim be'eineihem, whatever they see with their own eyes, or ma sheshamu b'pir shemua, or anything they hear, even as rumors, min ha'ma'oro shvimehem, of whatever occurred in their day. Lefichach Balak, therefore Balak, remember he was a king, Shahai Melech. Hine miyamim rabim yipaked etzlo mashos Yaakov. He already had these history books. Here he was aware. He had the books. It was by him from time immemorial, he knew what happened to Yaakov. Yisrael Saba. Who's Yaakov? Yaakov is Yisrael, our great-great-great-grandpappy, our grandfather. And what did he do to the Amorites? That's what he knew about, right? We can go back to Genesis and see in the story of Shechem. Shechem was defeated by Yaakov and his children in a scheme, we have to admit, but nevertheless, a very small tribe, a very small family defeated a whole nation, people. All that Israel, we're talking about Israel, we're talking about Yaakov, we're talking about one person. He was just one person. And even if you want to include his whole house, it was a very small number. Nevertheless, Nitzach Uma Shlema, they conquered an entire people. Like it says, if you look in Genesis 48:22, Asher lekachti miyad Amori v'charvi v'kashti. Yaakov, how do we read this? So Yaakov says, which I took from the hand of the Amorites, right? He was talking about the success of the war and the land acquisition. He took with my sword and my bow. Those are the words that are used. Now, how do we understand for a Jew? What does it mean to have a sword and a bow? According to Chazal, if you look in Baba Basra, the Gemara, Kaf Kuf Gimel, that's 123, side A. Shapirshu, the explanation of my sword and my bow, B'charbi B'kashti, is B'tfilato. Yaakov, Israel, overcomes their enemies through their prayer. Asi Shapir, so that all works out well. Why? What is it about prayer? Prayer is the power of the lips. Shurabola, Kol Asher Osi Yisrosabala Mori B'tfilato. That Balak saw, how did he see? Through reading these chronicles, that the Jewish people, that Israel Saba, that Yaakov defeated the Amorites through his prayer. The Fishakol, Kocho, Bepiv, all of the power of Yaakov, the Jewish people, is in their mouths. Al Kain Hishtadel Hu Gam Kain Acher Echad Shegam Kain Kocho Bepiv. This is the very reason that he was chasing after Bilam. He wanted Bilam to come up and curse the Jews. He wanted to defeat the Jews, and he didn't see really a military answer, but he realized that if he can find somebody who can counterbalance their power, the Jewish power is in the mouth, find a person like Bilam who could use his power of the mouth to counter the Jews. That's why it says V'yar Balak. It says Balak saw. It doesn't say Balak heard. V'lo ne'emar v'yishma Balak. Why? Kikol koros hahem halohem ktuvim al sifri divrei yamim l'malchi adamah. Because all the history, all that happened, surely they were written in the chronicles that all the kings of the world had. He saw with his own eyes what was written in the Sefer, in the book. And entered this weakening or this cowardliness or this intimidation into his heart. You know what to do. Now if it's true, right, he read the Chronicles, that in all those previous years, a long time ago, that the Jewish people, Yaakov, was able to conquer with such a small number. So now he's looking at 9 million people. How am I able to ever defeat these people who are just such a great, massive numbers? That's why he does not say the words B'nai Yisrael or Ha'am or Kahal, but he uses the word Yisrael, because he's referring to Yisrael, meaning Yaakov, what he did to Shechem hundreds of years earlier. Of a Moab, when it comes to Moab, the Dahainu Klal Hamonan, they're considered part of that mass of non-educated people. Lo hitbonem b'mesha avar. they did not consider, they weren't really concentrating, they didn't even really care about the past. Remember, these are the masses. They only know about what tomatoes cost today in the shuk. Ki lo yodu mahu, right? They wouldn't know what this was. Lo pchadu ki min hoveh. The only fear they had was what they saw right now. And what did they see? Ma sharo beineim am rav atzum. They saw this mighty group of people. That's why they said, Vigar Moab mivnei am ki ravu. That's why the text says that Moab was frightened because of the Am, because they were mighty. L'haya hamon am shel Moab yireim mivnei shtei kitos. Now we're going to talk about two different groups of people in the desert. I just mentioned earlier there were 9 million. Everyone knows there were 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. How is it that I'm saying there's 9 million people? So we say that there were 600,000 men between 20 and 60. Well, they all had at least one wife, and they all had many children. So we're talking about at least 2.5 million to 3 million Jews. So the Kli Yakar says, and he brings a medrash to back himself up in the Mechilta. I'll read in a second, but he basically says that the Erev Rav, the people that attached themselves, that left Egypt with the Jews, were twice that amount. Twice the amount of the Jews. So we're talking about 3 million, now we have 9 million. Okay, that's how I came to that number. Lo rizeh kerizeh. Those two groups of people were not like each other. Kivim Erev Rav, this mixed multitude, ayureim machmas ruboyim. The reason that Moab was so afraid, they were afraid on account of their mighty numbers. Ki isa b'medrash, because this is the mechilta that the Kli Yakar brings down, that she'erev Rav haya shtei pamim shisha ribo. They were 2 times the 600,000. Regarding them, it says that's why the verse says that they grew frightened. They were afraid because of the people, because they were great. So first of all, we have to look at the word Am. We said that was one of the 4 pronouns used for the Jewish people. But I want to tell you something. It's not referring to the Jewish people at all. It says, Kara Erra b'shem ha'am, ki lo mivnei Yisrael. That when we talk, whenever the Kli Yakar says, whenever the word ha'am is used, except for a few exceptions, it's always referring to the mixed multitudes. Ki rav hu. They were frightened because it was great, it was so many. Ki rabim hema bemes. There really were a lot of them. Aval b'nei Yisrael, but when it comes to b'nei Yisrael, lo yu kol kach rabim. They weren't as many, meaning they were 1/3. Lo yiru mehem mitzad ribuyim. They weren't afraid because of the massive amount. Amna mitzad acher hayamoyer Yisrael lehem. But it was from a different aspect that there was a fear of Israel on the Moab. Asher olav ne'mar, because it says, Yekatz Moab mipnei b'nei Israel. It says that the Moab was disgusted because of b'nei Israel. So that's the Jewish people. There was a Yekatz. There was a dread, a disgust. Now we're going to have to talk about this word, because a coat is a thorn. Kamosha Parashat Parashat Shmos, if you look in Exodus 1 verse 12, on the verse Yekutzu mipnei b'nei Israel, right over there it says that the Egyptians were dreaded because of the Jewish people. Sheina Parashis Ronasut Kotzim b'neihem. We're not going to explain it that Israel was like thorns in their eyes. No. Because if you're going to say that the Jewish people were like thorns in their eyes, it should say Yekutzu b'nei Israel. But it doesn't. It says b'nei Israel, in the face of Israel. So rather, it's the opposite way we're going to explain it. Ela ikpa mistabra. Shemitzrayim himshlu es atzmam lekotzim be'eret b'nei Israel. Shenimshlu legefen. That the Egyptians compared themselves as if they were thorns in value to the children of Israel, who were compared to clusters of grapes. So that's how they thought about themselves in relation to us, in relation to the Jewish people. As it says, if you look in Psalms 80, verse 9 and 10, and we read this verse already in the other part of the Kli Yakar, Gefen mi Mitzrayim tas'iyah, right? The geffen, the vines from Egypt, he is mobile, bringing up to garish goyim b'titayeho, and to exile, to get rid of the nations that are in the land of Canaan, and then planting the grapes in its place. Penita lifaneh v'tashrei shorasheha v'tamale aretz. In order to make an open area and then free it up, and then you can root the good stuff, which is the grapevines, and then it would fill the whole land. How does the world work? I'll tell you. When the owner of the field, who wrote Eli Tokerem B'Sadeh, he wants to plant a vineyard in his field. But guess what? It's Malay Kotzim. The field is full of weeds. What he needs to do is then to uproot those roots from the root. He uproots. It's a verb. He uproots the plant from its very roots, the noun. And only then can he go ahead and plant the seeds. In order to plant the good stuff in its place. This is how the Egyptians saw themselves, that Israel was implanted in the land of Egypt like Geffen, like a vineyard. And they were afraid that they were going to be pushed up out of the land. Right? Like in Shmuel Bet. In Shmuel Bet, that's 2 Samuel 23:6. Like a heap of thorns. The Canaanites like a heap of thorns. And also it says in Exodus 1 verse 10, right? The Egyptians thought that they were going to be kicked out of the land. It doesn't say us, it's talking about them. That's why it says, here that the Bnei Moab they dreaded, they were disgusted because of Bnei Israel. That they realized they were going to end up being removed from the land of Canaan on account of the children of Israel, who are compared to the vine. Now we know why here it says V'yikatz Moab mipnei bnei Israel. So the last pasuk I read was actually referring back to the Kutzu mipnei bnei Israel, and here we're talking about Moab. Shehem Yiraim. Here they were afraid. Penya Moab kikotz mushlach min aretz. Lest there will be Moab like a thorn that is thrown out of the earth, out of the ground. Meaning they were really afraid they were going to be chucked out. Mipnei bnei Israel, on account of, because of Israel. Mipnei hagefen, on account of the gefen, which will be see Hashem Mitzrayim, that Hashem took up out of Egypt, legaresh mipnei goyim, in order to expel the goyim from the land of Israel, with a ta'am shama, and to plant the Jewish people here in the land. Lechach Amar, that's why it says B'nai Israel, not as Israel or Am or Kahal, the children of Israel, Israel Sal B'nenu, because this is now hundreds of years later, and Israel, our grandfather, is no longer with us. Ki Gavar Halach Lo Lamo, he already went on to his world. Ubenav Yavu Shama, and the children now going into the promised land. Avaloa Erev Rav. But it wasn't on account of the Erev Rav that they had this dread, because Shenikra B'Shem Ha'am, that they had a fear of because of the masses of the people. Ki ma gavra meguvrim ma yitro le'erev rav al sharu los. It's a great question. What advantage was there? What great advantage was there that there was for the Erev Rav amongst, in comparison to all the other nations of the world? Shigarsh mivneim goyim, that the goyim are going to be taken out of the land of Canaan, the Yita Otam Mimakomo, and they are going to be planted in place of the Amorites, or of the goyim, the 7 Canaanite nations. Im lo aga b'nei Israel, it was only because of b'nei Israel. They were like, I'm not going to say parasites, but they're like Klingons. They were like, I'm not even called second-class citizens. They attached themselves, they converted at Mount Sinai, but they were still trouble for us even until today. We'll call them Tefel. They're not the Ikar B'nai Israel, they're not the prime Jews, but they are nevertheless part of the nation. But it wasn't on their account that the Goyim were expelled. It's on account of B'nai Israel that the nations, the seven Canaanite nations are expelled. V'achar kach nemar. Then it says, V'yomer Moab al ziknei Midian. Then Moab said to the elders of Midian, now the congregation wants to lick us up like an ox. Umar Rao Midyani al kach al bear al riv lo lehem. What exactly did Moab see to invite and to incite the Midianites to join up with them right? In other words, what was the inception? What went through their mind to think that we can get an ally such as the Midianites? I'm sorry, the Midianites were thinking, what can we do? What did Moab think that we can get the Midianites to join up with us? Since we see in Rashi explains in Parshas Matos, Osam ve'es Pinchas. If you look in Numbers 31:6, it's talking about the war, and they went out. They had 12,000 people, 1,000 from each tribe, and Pinchas. Shahalach Linkom. This is against the Midianites. Shahalach Linkom Nikmas Yosef Avi Imo, that went for the sake of vengeance. Who? Pinchas went for the sake of vengeance on account of not his father's father, but his mother's father. His father's father obviously we're talking about Pinchas, so we're talking about from the line of Kohanim. So we're talking about Yosef. His mother's father is from the line of Yosef. Shnei Mar, it says in Breshit, Lamed Zayin, in Genesis 37:36, V'hamidanim machru oiso lePotifar. I know it goes back and forth between the Midyanim and the Yishmaelim and the Midyanim. In the end, it's the Midyanim that sold him to Egypt. So they were involved we understand that he believed everything came from God. But nevertheless, these people still deserve the punishment and a vengeance. Yosef nikru kahal. And since he was taking vengeance for his mother's side, that's why we see that the Bnei Yosef, they're called kahal. Shnei Mar says also there in Lamed Aleph, no, it's Lamed Hayes, but at the end of Deuteronomy, where Moses is blessing the different tribes. Okay, so go to Deuteronomy 37:36. 35:11, where he says Goy, Kahal Goyim, a nation and a congregation of nations. Rashi is explaining Kahal Goyim is specifically referring to Yosef. And that's why it says that Moab spoke to the Ziknei Midian. He figured, I get the Midianites involved because they know that the Jewish people have a vengeance for the Midianites for selling Yosef down the pike to Egypt. So Moab was trying to convince the Midianites, you also have what to fear from this congregation. Who's that? The Bnei Yosef. Sheyirtzu lakach michem